Podía hacerlo en español, pero obviamente inglés es un poquito más fácil. As Helen suggested, I am the really two roles here at Southern Command, both the foreign policy advisor, in which we've had sort of former ambassadors at our major commands really for many years. But now, because of our concept about really the civilianization to some extent of Southern Command and the importance of interagency cooperation, that job has also kind of been elevated to a civilian deputy position. We're going to talk a little bit about how, well, you can read this, but who we are, what we think is important in the region, some of the challenges of the region, and some of the key initiatives, some of the things that Southern Command is doing to kind of counter those challenges, ameliorate those problems. And if we have time, talk a little bit about Haiti as kind of a great example of the type of trends that Helen was just mentioning. I guess I've got a half hour, 40 minutes, something like that. Okay, I don't want to, you have to, just stop me because, you know, former ambassadors can go on and on and on, you know, so you, yeah, okay, good. Just so folks know, of course, the Southern Command has its roots in the old Panama Canal Zone. First Marine units went to Panama in 1903 to actually protect the railroad. Of course, other units followed up during the construction. The Army Corps of Engineers was very involved in the construction of the canal. Actually, the Secretary of the Army was a member of the Canal Commission Board for many, many years. But of course, with the signing of the Panama Canal Treaties in '97, there was that gradual move out of Panama and here to Miami. For those of you who remember, of course, there was a lot of competition for where Southern Command would actually end up. Puerto Rico wanted this command very badly. But in the end, I think that this was a great decision. One, obviously, Miami's the gateway to Latin America in the United States. Great transport links to Latin America. And when you talk to former commanders, and there's actually several that live in this area, and I remember this, I was assigned to Panama in the 80s. One of the downsides about being in Panama was the commander had to sort of worry about U.S.-Panamanian relations about half the time. All of those small, you know, frictions that you would have from having 8,000 or 9,000 U.S. troops in the zone. So now being in Miami, we don't have that issue, obviously, no. And Doral has been a great host. Coral Gables has been a great host. So we are delighted to be here. This is our vision and our mission. It hasn't changed that much in recent years. But just to point out a couple of things. We do consider ourselves a joint and interagency organization. In other words, a joint being all the US services, military services are represented. Interagency, the fact that we have many representatives, actually more than 20 civilian representatives of other U.S. agencies work and live in our building as part of a whole effort. And indeed, that's really what it's about, supporting whole-of-government efforts to enhance security. We are a combat command, right? We could conduct full-spectrum military operations, as they say. But we are convinced, I think most of you would convinced, that the chances of, you know, the U.S. being involved in a shooting war in Latin America, very low. The chances of state-on-state conflict between nations in Latin America, although it could happen, I think that probability is low. So it's really incumbent on us to kind of concentrate on other issues. And when we talk about security, this is really based on two broad notions. One, that you have to think about national security in its broadest sense, and think that to the extent that the United States' neighbors in the region are democratic, are prosperous, are stable, are secure, that contributes to the United States' national security, right? Everybody wants good neighbors. You think about it on a personal level, you know, who do you want living next door to you? You know, you want a a couple, a guy has a job, woman has a job, the kids go to school, they cut their grass, etc.? Or do you want to live next to a crack house, right? So it's important to us that the people and geographically close to us are relatively well off. And secondly, there's the notion of that interplay between security and development. And that is something that people kind of refuse to think about for a long period of time. In fact, a lot of development professionals, a lot of NGOs really put arm's length any thought of working with the military or the police or other security forces at arm's length. But in fact, for any country to develop, there has to be some at least minimal level of security in that country. If there's not, people can't get to work, kids can't get to school, investors won't invest, etc. And if you sort of flip that over, of course, if you're at a level of development where, hey, most of your people are well educated, healthy, they have a house, they have a job, you're probably not going to have those severe security problems. So that's kind of the general construct of why we do what we do. For those of you who are not familiar with how the DoD is structured, Department of Defense is structured, back in the 1980s, we went to this structure under the Goldwater-Nichols Act, of course, the Secretary of Defense, but the combatant commands are really split now between two broad areas. One, a series of folks that their responsibility is geographic. We're here, Southern Command, and Southern Command encompasses responsibility for all of Latin America and the Caribbean, with the exception of Mexico and the Bahamas, Puerto Rico, Turks and Caicos. But of course there are CENTCOM, folks that are managing the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, AFRICOM, Europe, Pacific, and then some functional commands. This is Special Forces, Transportation, STRATCOM, Strategic Command, Joint Forces Command. But under our system, of course, the service chiefs don't fight the wars, okay? These folks are responsible for equipping and training the force and then lending it to the combatant commanders when they need them. The fact is that Southern Command really does not have any great number of forces attached to it. If we need to do an operation, whether it's war or whether it's a humanitarian operation, we have to ask. If we need a hospital ship, if we need a ship, we have to ask Big Navy for it. They're not permanently assigned to us. And of course, the chairman of the Joint Staff plays a advisory role to the President as the President's chief military advisor. It's a rather complex system, but it kind of works. We, of course, are here in Miami, about 1,000, depending on how you count it with contractors and so forth, 1,000, 1,500 people, spread out actually in 7 or 8 buildings. We're finally moving into permanent quarters in the fall, kind of about 200 yards from where we are in Doral. Our tip of the spear, if you will, are our security cooperation offices. These are military groups, military assistance groups that are Southern Command officers and staff in U.S. embassies in Latin America, in 24 of them, and those offices can range anywhere from 3 or 4 folks to maybe 70 or 80 in a place like Bogota. But those are the people that implement our projects, okay? Whether it's military education, whether it's sales of equipment, whether it's training, those are the folks that do it. We do have what they're called component commands. These are parts of the services that are attached to us, but they're only headquarters elements. These are all kind of uniformed military bureaucrats doing planning and so forth. But 12th Air Force in Tucson, Army South, San Antonio, they were in Puerto Rico for a while, they were in the zone before that. The dreaded 4th Fleet up in Mayport, Jacksonville, fleet with no ships. With a very small office of Marines actually in Doral, right down the street from us. And our special operations people are homestead at the reserve base there. You probably know that we maintain what they call cooperative security locations, which are very small pieces of the international airports to do air drug missions, to do detection missions in El Salvador and in Curacao. And then some joint task forces. These are relatively small groups of military folks from all branches